I think that for the last few years, the industry blew up. The vacation rental side became exceptionally popular. So I've been in the industry since 2008, and I've seen it continue to grow really from the downturn in 2008 onwards. But then it really blew up around COVID for a lot of valid reasons. So to your point, Rodman, there has been a lot of new people getting into the industry, and it was easy, to be honest. If you think about what was happening over the last few years, if you were able to get a property at the right price and put it up on Airbnb, Vrbo, or one of the OTAs, odds are you were able to get some pretty consistent guests. But I think those times are quickly changing. And the true professionals, the people who decide that they've got the passion for this industry, are going to be the ones that focus on hospitality. In the end, the guest experience is what makes this industry so special.
My name is Rodman Schley. As a real estate expert, I've invested millions of dollars in vacation properties all around the world, and I've been involved in the valuation of billions of dollars of properties. I want to share my 35 years of experience along with vacation home investment tips from the top minds in the short-term vacation rental industry. Now, let's do the work. Welcome to the Vacation Property Secrets Podcast. I'm your host, Rodman Schley, and today we're fortunate to have Adam Norko, host of the Art of Hospitality podcast. Adam has more than 20 years of experience in property management, with the last 16 years focused on the vacation rental sector. A former Marine, Adam has spent time as the marketing director for Seaside Vacations on the Outer Banks and is currently the Chief Growth Officer for the Travel Advantage Network. And now he offers growth consulting to brands in the vacation rental space. Adam, welcome to the show.
Rodman, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is awesome because, today we're going to talk a little bit about hospitality management and how to really take care of the people that are coming to your property. Very important. A lot of people buy a rental property and they think it's just plug and play. I'm going to rent it. I'm just going to go. We're going to get people in here. I'm going to take wheelbarrows of money to the bank, but they forget about the one thing that's really, really important. And that's making sure that you are managing properly, correctly, and really taking care of people.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that for, the last few years, the industry blew up. The vacation rental side became exceptionally popular. So I've been in the industry since 2008, and I've seen it continue to grow really from the downturn in 2008 onwards. But then it really blew up around COVID for a lot of valid reasons. So to your point, Rodman, there has been a lot of new people getting into the industry, and it was easy, to be honest. If you think about what was happening over the last few years, if you were able to get a property at the right price and put it up on Airbnb, Vrbo, or one of the OTAs, odds are you were able to get some pretty consistent guests. But I think those times are quickly changing. And the true professionals, the people who decide that they've got the passion for this industry, are going to be the ones that focus on hospitality. In the end, the guest experience is what makes this industry so special.
What do you think, Adam? Do you think we're in the same boat together? So you've got a lot of new people coming in, and maybe they don't understand the hospitality side of things, and they don't quite understand what they need to do to take care of guests and such. Does that hurt everybody, or does that help the people who are really good at taking care of their guests?
That is a really good question. I have this discussion quite a bit. I've got a podcast myself called The Art of Hospitality, where we talk a lot about this. My background for the last 16 plus years has been on the professional vacation rental side, but I've worn a lot of hats while I've done that. I've been on the management side, I've been in the marketing side, I've been on the vendor side where I'm selling products back to professional vacation rental managers. In addition, my wife and I manage on the side 4 homes, and we manage exclusively through Airbnb. And we could touch on the reasons about that, but I would fall into that host camp as well as sort of that professional mindset camp. And I have this discussion a lot about really what makes a professional host or professional vacation rental manager. And then to your point, do some of the actions on either side of that help or hinder either one? And my underlying idea is that I think mindset is really where this comes from. I think that there's going to be a group of people as times change here, or as the transition that we're already going through, where they decide that their passion is not here. Their passion is not managing properties. Their passion is not around hospitality, and that will come out. But then there's going to be a large portion where they do have that professional mindset, and they do want to continue to build this hospitality brand. So I think in the end, the volume of people that came into the industry helped the industry at large. And the ones that maybe are underperforming and that maybe will fall out over the next, 12, 18, 24 months, I think that it's probably the right thing for that group to fall out and recognize that maybe this isn't the right fit for them. But by and large, I think that the attention that has been brought to the industry is a huge boost for everybody. And when this all shakes out, I think we're all going to be better for it. I think that the people who do stick around are going to be much more professional than when we were 5-10 years ago, when we were, trying to figure out how to professionalize. And as a whole, I think that the industry is still going through a large amount of professionalization.
It seems to me that a lot of people come into the industry too, thinking, well, I'm going to self-manage my property. I'm going to do all this. But then it gets a little overwhelming. They figure out that, well, maybe this is a little bit too much for me, or maybe not what I expected. But that's okay too. They can still keep their properties. They can still invest. But that's when you seek outside help. That's when you seek that management company that can come in and help your property perform at those levels that you're talking about.
I wholeheartedly agree. Now, I think that the important crux of that assumption is that you buy at the right price, because I think that we are in a market that has been booming for so long that if you bought at the beginning of the boom, then I would agree with you. You probably bought at the right price where you can afford to outsource. And then to your point, why don't you remove yourself from the day-to-day hassles that might come with property management and give that to a professional group that does this day in and day out and understands all of the best practices and the standards and the right tools and how to manage the operations and the systems and the process. I see a lot of value in the professional side of things. I think the group that's going to be in the biggest challenge or the ones that are facing the biggest decision point in the next 12 months or so are going to be the ones that bought on a little bit of a higher side of the real estate market. And if they think about giving up that 20 to 25, 30% on the commission side, they're not able to think about how do they continue to make their mortgage. And that's just the reality of the situation. It's the reality of real estate. It's the reality of investment. You buy at the right time, you have a better chance to make some different decisions. So I think there will be a group of people that are going to be forced into this decision where either I need to do this myself or I need to sell. And that'll be interesting to see the fallout around that, either from a real estate perspective or from a management perspective. A lot of those homes might end up sort of flowing back to the professional side regardless, or it starts to boost up a long-term management side of things, which I think is a lot of value as well, because and I'll speak for my market in particular, but I live on the Outer Banks in North Carolina. And I think this is true for the majority of large vacation rental markets. There's a number of homes that are today for rent for vacation rentals or short-term rentals that probably shouldn't be in the rental pool. They should probably fall into the long-term side. And what that's done for the local markets is, one, it's inflated prices a little bit higher than they probably should be. But two, they put a real strain on local real estate. They put a real strain on the long-term rentals for the people that need to work in those markets. So hopefully we'll see some of that sort of flatten itself out and work itself out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on something really important. We talk about this in my mastermind all the time. It's kind of like you really, if you can figure out what you want early on, it's going to be better. If you can figure it out before you bought that property, so you can work out your cash flows. I mean, because so many people go, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to self-manage it. And then they get in and go, I don't want to do that. But they don't think about the impact of that pro forma. They don't look at that NOI. What's that 20 to 30 to whatever percent hit it might be going to do to my returns at the end of the day? And then am I still making my mortgage payments? Am I putting myself in a loss position now because I've gone from self-management to having another management company do it? And that's why I think it's so important before you even get into it to make sure you decide, do I want to manage this? Do I want those headaches? Do I want those problems? Do I want to deal with this? Do I want to make sure I'm accommodating guests before you even made that purchase?
I agree. And I think that because it was easy for so long, there were people who got into it who probably, if they had fully thought through that process that you just described, maybe wouldn't have made that investment decision, because now they're coming out on the other side and understanding how much work this really is. For anyone that thinks that managing a short-term rental or owning, a vacation rental home and trying to manage it yourself is passive income, that is the furthest thing from the truth. It's not passive in any way. So you've got to put your time and attention into this. Now, the other level I would add to that assessment, Rodman, is I think that you need to determine early on if you're going to manage it or if you're going to have a company manage it. But the other thing you need to think about is how you're going to go about marketing it. Because I think that the other thing that the industry is starting to realize is that the OTAs, the channels, the Airbnbs, the Verbos, the booking.com, when those aren't giving you the results that you expected when you bought the property, now you're in a really, really difficult position. Because if you own one property, or even let's say you own 10 properties, you're still very much behind the curve from a marketing perspective. One, now you've got to learn marketing because you didn't go into this with the intentionality that you were going to actually do the marketing. But two, you're battling against larger companies that are well established, that have a presence, that understand marketing, that have a much bigger budget. So to think that you can just come off an OTA and all of a sudden figure out how to get direct bookings and supplement the ones that maybe aren't coming through the OTAs, I think that's a mistake. And I see that time and time again, especially at this time where we're coming out of the summer and people are starting to recognize, well, the reservations were down, so I just want to get direct bookings. It's not a switch that you can just turn on. That there's a lot of work that goes behind that.
Percent. And I think a lot of people come in too and say, well, I'll just put it on, Airbnb and we're going to just have people automatically coming. But they don't think about the algorithms. I mean, Airbnb's got their own algorithms. You got to take some time. Even if you go buy something that was historically an Airbnb and all of a sudden you become a host, Airbnb doesn't let you just transfer that host over. If somebody else has super host status, doesn't mean you're going to get it. So then all of a sudden you're down in the algorithms. You got to go and get things right and up to speed so that you can even be recognized on the platform.
Yep. And there's only going to be a certain amount of top performers on any one of these OTAs. I mean, that's just the reality. Everybody isn't going to perform at that top level. So if you're jumping into one of these OTAs and expecting that you're just going to flow up to the top, and to your point, understanding the algorithm and all the pieces that come with it, there's going to be 95% of that inventory that's going to sit below that top fold. And how to battle that, I think that's what the industry is starting to figure out right now is, well, if I'm too low on these OTAs, well, then how do I supplement those reservations? And I think that's the tough part.
Yeah. So let's go into a little bit on the Airbnb stuff. So number one, management. Effective management. When you go into these things, when I'm thinking about even like my property down in Costa Rica, when we came in, we had to do the same thing everybody else had to do. We had to make sure that we became a super host as quickly as we could. And to become a super host, you got to perform as a management. You got to provide services to people. You got to get those 5-star ratings. So let's talk first about that person who's just coming in and looking at establishing themselves and to get their hospitality tip top right out of the gates. What kind of advice would you give to those folks?
Well, so I'll give, and this is a couple plugs for guests that were on my podcast relatively recently, but it dovetails specifically into this topic. So the first one I'll mention is STR Insights. And this is a company that specializes in leveraging data to find the right properties to buy in the right locations. So I think that's the first point is you need to find the right property in the right location that is going to perform well, especially at this time in the game. The supply is exceptionally high and the demand is continuing to dwindle. So you really got to find that top performing property. So STR Insights is a good place to start your research. Now, if you've got a property, you're new to it, IntelliHost is the other one I'll plug. That one is a way to optimize your Airbnb listing to the best it possibly can be. A/B testing a lot of different variables within a listing in order to make sure that you are maximizing the algorithm, to your point, Rodman. But I think outside of that, outside of selecting the right property and then making sure you're maximizing the listing, I think then you get to really the crux of the entire vacation rental, short-term rental industry, which is the operational side. At the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is create great guest experiences. Now, in order to do that, you've got to figure out how to attract them, right? You've got to figure out how do I get these guests into the property? And I think that the important part for that is finding your niche, figuring out why this property is the right property, and then figuring out what can I do to maximize whatever that particular niche is. And I'll give you an example. We manage 4 properties, my wife and I, and 3 out of the 4, we've seen a down year. It's just the way that this year is happening. Luckily, the one that we own out of those 4 is the top performer, and we're probably performing up to our best year, or if not overperforming our best year. And a lot of that has to do with us just maximizing the resources that we had at hand. We fenced in the yard. It's a nice, well-kept yard with grass, so it's perfect for animals, so pet-friendly. If you're considering coming in and you're trying to boost reservations, I think pet-friendly is probably the earliest thing you should do. Get a pet-friendly home. It's not going to hurt your home any worse than sending a bunch of kids in the home. I've got 4 kids. I can say that with confidence. So I think pet-friendly is the first one you do. And then you want to get into the house and you want to make it a nice, clean, comfortable space. So that's just sort of the basics. How do I find my niche? How do I make sure that I attract the people to it? But the end of the day is really coming down to that hospitality experience. And that's making sure that everyone feels welcomed and comfortable in the environment that you're welcoming them into. And the one thing that I'll mention that I think is really the biggest part of that experience is communication. If you did everything else wrong and all you did right was communication, and you were on top of it and you responded within, 10 minutes of every message, and you made sure that you were hospitable and nice in every one of those messages, and you were trying to find solutions with every question and concern that came up, my guess is you'd still get a pretty solid rating just because you are so communicative. And I think that's the underlying piece of hospitality. I think we all are generally understanding of what hospitality is. We sort of live it day in and day out with everyone that we interact with. You just need to raise that bar a little bit higher when you start to do this as a profession. You need to make sure that every interaction you go into is the best hospitable, communicative environment that you could create.
Yeah, it seems too like we talk a lot about there's so many houses out there. There's so many different opportunities for people to go and rent. It's like, I always tell my group, I'm like, go into it, look at the averages, look at what everybody else is doing, but then go into it with a mindset that you need to outperform. You need to be better. You need to be more communicative. You need to go, that's a tough word to say, communicative. You need to go in and make sure that you're outperforming the person that's next door, the person that's down the street, or the person that's in that area, because people will come back to you. I mean, if you can outperform and you can be really good, I can't even tell you how many people come back to the property that I have in Costa Rica because we outperform, because they know that they're going to have a really good time. They're going to have a good experience at a beautiful property, and they're not going to have any problems. So you get that repeat, but at the same time, it's those new people that are coming in too, because they're not just calling you, they're calling the guy down the street, they're calling the guy down the road. So you need to make sure that you're always on top of your game to make sure that you are outperforming whatever they might be doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old sort of analogy or story about outrunning the person next to you, not outrunning the bear. And I wholeheartily agree with that. I think you need to know who your competition is. So do a search on Airbnb if that's the focus. And I mentioned earlier that I'm a big believer in professional vacation rental management, but for the four we focus on Airbnb because it's everything in one package, right? It's your marketing, it's your accounting, it's your guest communications. Everything's there without me having to go out and recreate that. And because we're not trying to grow a big company, I don't need to try to figure out how to go out and create direct marketing. We're going to do the best we can with the platform that we have, which is our chosen platform as Airbnb. So it is what it is. So I would say, and we do this, we go out and we do a search and we look at the competition. Who else is coming up that's like our home that we need to figure out how do we outpace what they're doing? Now, the other part that you mentioned there is around the communication. Airbnb knows how important that communication is too. If you get a booking that comes in, or if you go out and you look, if you're searching for a place to stay, they'll tell you how quickly that host responds. So they know that the guests are looking for someone that is on it and responding. If you're waiting a day, 2 days to respond, you might as well not be in this game. They're looking for people that are responding in 10, 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, they've moved on. I mean, that's the world we live in anyway. I mean, we're sitting in there, we're in that swipe up world where we want things quick. We want information fast. Our attention spans are low. So that person, I agree, that really responds quickly and makes sure that you're getting what you need immediately is going to win that race every single time. Regardless, you might have a much better property that's nicer, cheaper, more whatever it might be. You might be better. But if you're not responding quicker, you're going to lose.
Yeah, if everything's even, communication wins every time. And even if things aren't even, I would say communication wins the majority of the time.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious on why only Airbnb, because a lot of people would say, well, I'm going two platforms. I'm VRBO or Verbo, as they say now, or, and also going on the Airbnb platform.
And we've wrestled with that. I think it more is around, our life. So I mentioned before around mindset. And I think that, my wife and I have other engagements throughout the day. This isn't the only thing we're doing. So we're trying to make things as simple as possible. And Airbnb has been the top performer. Maybe we're still riding the wave that has come through over the last few years, but to have to manage multiple platforms was just something we were not interested in doing. And Airbnb was performing for us, so we didn't do it. But at the end of the day, if you really want to play the game, not of maximizing whatever it is that you have and making sure that you attract the most guests and try to move as much revenue through that property as you can. The idea is that you have to get to direct bookings. The OTAs aren't going to maximize your property. And I have this discussion a lot when I'm talking with people that are interested in marketing. And the reality is that unless you're committed with growing, then you're just, as I mentioned previously in the discussion, you're going to be battling an uphill battle, and you better be ready for a significant outlay of resources, both your time as well as money, in order to do that. And it's a very long game to try to get to direct booking. So our perspective is, let's try to keep this as simple as possible, but make it the best experience that we can. And just like you, we tend to get a lot of repeat guests, and not because we're thinking about it from the marketing perspective of let's build the list and let's get newsletters out and let's spend all our time doing that. We've chosen not to go that route. And I recommend that route if you truly want to grow and you want to professionalize, but that's not what we're doing. We have the side hustle mindset, and our perspective is keep this simple. And if we create really great experiences in a great environment, then those people will come back. And we see that time and again. We continue to have repeat guests.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Vacation Property Secrets podcast. I want to let you know about one question that I get all the time. And that's, how do I forecast my cash flow and my profitability when investing in a vacation home? Now, if you've ever wondered that, or you know somebody who has, you're in the right place. We've created a free training called Financial Forecasting for Maximum Vacation Home Profitability. Now, in this training, we're going to guide you step by step on how to accurately project rental income, estimate your operating expenses, and calculate your returns so you can make informed investment decisions. You can access the free training at vacationpropertysecrets.com. So if you're ready to dive deeper into financial fundamentals and maximize your profitability, visit vacationpropertysecrets.com. Yeah, well, you're in the Outer Banks, right? So, and by the way, I've never been to the Outer Banks. I think I might have been through that. I think I might have driven through there, but I've not gone and stayed there. The only thing I know about Outer Banks is, wasn't there a show called Outer Banks for these like treasure hunt? I don't even remember what it was.
I didn't make it past the first few episodes, so I don't know if they ended up on a treasure hunt, but it is called the Outer Banks, but not filmed in the Outer Banks. It was filmed down in Wilmington. So there's some pieces that you could look at and say, oh, that's kind of that funky. I'll give you one example. You can't take a ferry from the Outer Banks to the middle of the state in Raleigh, so that's not reality. But with that said, it's a really great place. I grew up outside of Boston. And since I've been in the Outer Banks for the last almost 20 years, there's really no other place that I'd want to be. It's just a really nice place. And if you think about vacation rentals, that's one of the nice things about the industry, is that if you manage or you live in a place where people want a vacation, then it's probably going to be a relatively nice place. So it's out of the way. We've got really nice beaches, nice arts community, really great surfing. It's a good place to be and raise kids.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for quite a while. You've been about 20 years in the business, and things have evolved a lot over the last 20 years. And, I'm thinking back to 20 years ago, we were probably sitting there in about 2004. Things were going great. We hadn't quite hit that big 2008 debacle with the banking systems yet. But there's been an incredible evolution since that time. I remember buying my first cabin in 2001 up in Keystone, Colorado. And, we did just have Vrbo at that time. There was no Airbnb at that time. But the industry has really evolved pretty rapidly. What do you think the biggest changes have been over that 20 years?
I think it's awareness without question. So I can remember looking at a Focusrite, which is a group that just does studies within the industry. So I was looking at a Focusrite study back in 2008 because I was sitting in a marketing director seat for a company out here that managed about 350 properties. So I was staying pretty dialed into the marketing side of things and the data around that. And the Focusrite study said that only 8% of the traveling public was aware of vacation rentals. Not that they'd even stayed in vacation rentals, just that there was an awareness of vacation rentals. So fast forward, whatever it is, 16, 17 years, and now we are rivaling, if not surpassing, hotels in a lot of ways. So I think the awareness is probably the biggest change, but there's a lot of things that come with that. I mentioned earlier that I think this is an industry that's still going through professionalization. I wholeheartedly agree with that, but I think it's evolved a lot since 2008. I think the professionalization has continued from that time until now. I think there's still a lot of room and opportunity for that to happen. But as a result of that, you have a lot of new ideas that have come through. You have a lot of new technology that has come through. Airbnb wasn't a thing back then. So, if you just look at the awareness, and our discussion here today is sort of centering around that. If you just look at what Airbnb and the impact that it has had, and there's positive and negative, there's pros and cons. I could discuss the sort of negative side of that as well, but I think that the awareness has lifted the entire industry tremendously. And now we're at a point, really, for the first time since 2008, that the industry is not growing. It's actually retracting a little bit. And that's hard for a lot of people to understand or figure out how to navigate, because they've been at a steady state of growth without having to change much. And now they're in a place where they've got to face things and recognize, if it's not going to continue to grow, how do I adjust to the new normal? And how do I continue to expand the business, but at the same time, not necessarily expect what I had for the past few years? So
Yeah.
I see that as a lot of opportunity. It's an interesting time because there are a lot of difficult decisions, but there will be a lot of opportunity that comes from.
Yeah. There's so many different industries that have the same contraction. I mean, like, when you think about how AI is evolving and there's so many different things, and there's so many industries where there are less opportunities, it takes less people to do things. Like you said, with us, it's a little bit different because we might have an oversupply and maybe not as many people utilizing platforms right now, but that could always turn, of course. But I always tell people, if you are among the best at what you do, you're going to be okay. There's going to be people at that lower end of the spectrum that are going to struggle. They're going to try to figure out, maybe they're going to liquidate, maybe they're going to sell, but that's going to be creating opportunities for the people who really are going in and being exceptional at what they do.
I can't agree with that anymore. And that goes back to the tool I mentioned before with the STR Insights. The founder, Kenny, was on our podcast a couple weeks ago, and he had mentioned just that fact. When you dig into the data on Airbnb, and as much as we want to say that there's a decline in reservations, if you look at the top performers, they continue to perform. And that was, I guess, a little bit of my example with the 4 that we have. 3 out of 4 are underperforming, and our top property, the one that I mentioned, is overperforming. So I think you're wholeheartedly right. The ones that are really, really good at this are the ones that are going to outpace everybody else. And everybody else is going to have to decide, do I fall out or do I adjust so I can improve? And I think that's where the professionalization comes from, is that everyone who's underneath those top performers is going to have to pick up their game and professionalize even faster.
Yeah. So what would you say are some of the top mistakes that people are making? I mean, that person is sitting there going, oh man, my bookings are down. And maybe they're just subjected to the market right now and the changes, but what are the bigger mistakes that you see people making in the industry right now?
Well, the first one I would say is that purchase price. Unless you've got money that you need to sit somewhere, I don't think it's the right time to buy. I haven't bought a property in probably 3 or 4 years for that reason. The prices just don't make sense, and they're not going to pencil. It's going to be really hard to figure out how to cash flow on any of the prices or deals that are out there these days, unless somehow you get some amazing deals. So I think on the front end, it's the purchase. And I think that's the same with sort of any investment and specifically real estate. It all comes down to where you purchase. So I think that's one side of it. But let's move that aside and let's assume that, hey, we've got these properties, or maybe it's to your point, Rodman, people that have had a property and are now trying to figure out, what do we do next? I think it's the reliance on the OTAs. I think that it's getting into this and assuming that the OTAs are going to be the ones that are going to be filling my calendar. Now, if you extrapolate that back to the earlier point, if you buy at the right price, then you don't necessarily have to worry about that as much. And that's the fortunate position that we are with the property that I mentioned. That's why we can be reliant on Airbnb and say, look, I'm not going to worry about it. We know that the reservations that are coming through are going to give us what we need to outpace what our performance needs to be from a financial perspective. But I think that the people that are in a difficult position and the OTAs are not driving the bookings as quickly as they can, I think they're faced with a few decisions. And I had this discussion last week with a husband and wife pair down in Florida, and they were trying to figure out, how do we get direct bookings? And I had to walk through all of the processes about marketing and how long it takes to build that process. Or you could hand it over to a property management company, and they weren't comfortable with the idea of doing that because they felt like they would lose that personal touch, the personal touch that they have with the property. And I don't disagree with that. But I think what you've got to do is you've got to balance out those decisions to see, from a resources perspective, from an investment perspective, where is my time and my money going to be best spent? So the last option, right? I think it's double down on the OTAs. I think it's give it off to a property management company, or it's sit tight and just deal with whatever it is that you have, which is the path that we chose because we were able to purchase it at the right point and say, look, it is what it is. Let's ride it out and do the best that we can with what we have. But if you're not trying to grow that company, if all you want to do is own an investment property and have it rented out, then I think the two options are go with the OTAs and just, it is what it is, or give it over to a property management company and be okay with giving up 20% because they're going to take a huge amount of effort off your plate.
Yeah. Well, I think people's goals are different, right? I mean, some people might come in to make money, but some might be going, you know what, I just want this to cash flow a little bit to pay the bills, and I'm going to eventually be retiring in the home. I mean, so it really kind of comes down to what you want to do and what you want to be doing, what your long-term investment goal is. Whether it is, for some people, it's not even a money-making thing. It's like, I want to use this property 5 weeks out of the year. I'm just going to rent it the rest of the time, try to cover as many bills as I can, and I'm going to be happy. I'm going to get appreciation over the holding period and until I retire and move there. I mean, so that's okay too.
That's
But
great.
you've got to have well-defined goals.
Yeah, that's what the industry was built on. So when I was starting on the Outer Banks in 2008, that's what this was. This was the second home market where people would have these second homes because they loved it here and they wanted to stay here. And then, hey, well, let's rent it out so that we can cover some of our expenses. But it wasn't the idea of, I need this property, I need this asset to cash flow as much as it can. That has definitely evolved over the last few years as you think about that evolution that we talked about. The idea that you're buying these investments and generating this cash flow from it is something that has, now it makes sense. It's real estate. That's what real estate does in a lot of different verticals. But that was something that wasn't necessarily in this vertical as it started. It was more of that second home mindset.
Yeah. Well, and you're speaking my love language when we're talking about valuation and going in and really kind of figuring out, so many people don't even think about the cash flows. I mean, they'll go in, they see a property, it's an emotional buy for them. Mm-hmm. And they're not looking at what those expenses are going to be. They're not looking at what the repairs and maintenance is going to be. They're not thinking about the management. They're not thinking about that. They're just saying, hey, I'll buy this and I'm going to have somebody else pay for it. And that's the extent. And then they overpay for a property and wonder why they're not cash flowing and put themselves in bad positions. So when you're talking about really going in and identifying, number one, your goals, number two, identifying your cash flow, and then buying right, that buying decision is one of the most important things you do.
What you buy for. The whole deal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because if you overpay for the property, like you said, you might be sitting there and you might be negative cash flowing, but maybe that's okay for you. Maybe it's okay to be negative cash flowing if your goals are aligned with that, to say, you know what, I'm okay with a little bit of negative cash flow. I'm more into the use and I'm going to eventually be in it. But for that person who wants a business, if you're not sitting there doing really detailed projections on your expenses, real detailed projections on how much money am I going to get in. And I always tell people to be conservative. Be conservative when you put that in, and then go try to outperform those conservative estimates.
Yeah, and I would even say back of the napkin math at the beginning is okay. I'm with you. Get into the details as you get deeper. But if you're looking at a purchase price, do some back of the napkin math real quick on a conservative side and say, all right, how much do I expect to come in? If I give up 20% to a management company, does this deal still make sense? If it doesn't make sense and you need that cash flow, probably not the right purchase to me.
Yeah. And, I've got a private equity company that buys vacation homes. And I tell people, it's like, for when I'm going in there, I'm the most conservative, crusty bastard you're ever going to meet in your life. So I'm going to make sure this thing pencils out. And if it's not meeting certain thresholds, it goes right out the window. And that's one of the reasons why Costa Rica was so appealing to me, because in Costa Rica, the property values are still at a point, even though they are inflating rapidly, which is also a good thing, it still pencils out where I can still get that rate of return that I want. I can still put a manager in place down there to make sure that I don't have to fly down to Costa Rica to change out a hot water heater. And we still are going to get good returns. Yeah, last year was down a little bit, but that was mostly the Canadian dollar. We don't have to get into that right now. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if it doesn't pencil out, run.
Yeah, I mean, if it's cash flowing and you're down, that's not that big of a deal, right? As long as that's not your sole income, then all right, whatever. It's still a good investment, that cash flowing that's making me money. It's when it gets negative that it becomes a big deal. And to your point, if the buying decision was, hey, this is more for the use of the property than it is for that cash flow, not a problem. You go down, you take a little money out of your pocket and you make things even. But if the goal is that I need to make sure that this property is paid for by the rentals, then you need to be really, really careful on that original purchase. And that's the position that I think the industry is in right now. I think that there's a large number of homeowners, of hosts that are going to be in that position in the next, 12, 18 months. And it'll be interesting to see the way that things shake out, both in the real estate market as well as in the vacation rental market when that happens.
Yeah. People don't think about little things too, like reserves, having reserves ready in case you get that one big maintenance issue. And all of a sudden they're sitting there with a big expenditure that they don't know how they're going to, and we have, again, I hate to use my Costa Rica property, where we had that exact same thing happen, where it's like, we're sitting there, we're sitting on this beautiful river, and all of a sudden the riverbank started to cut differently. Mm-hmm. And so we had an option, and it was one option, and that was to fix the riverbank. I had to put in a retaining wall, right? So I had to put in 100-foot long 13-foot deep, all rock retaining wall. And luckily it's Costa Rica, so it cost me about 17 grand. But at the same time, if I didn't account for those reserves, if I didn't have reserves into place, it's going to cut into my cash flow. It's going to cut into me personally. And so people have to think about how much do I want in reserves to make sure that I can accommodate any kind of unexpected expenditures.
Yeah, and I think that that's what will happen as we transition in the market. I think you're going to get the professionals who stay in the market, who understand all of those variables and understand how to make a really solid investment and how to be really professional around the hospitality. And that's why I'm so bullish on the idea that this industry is going to be much stronger over the next couple of years, because I think the people that stay in it are going to be people who really understand it and really believe in it. And the ones that don't have the passion for that, they're going to end up exiting, and probably rightly so. And hopefully it was a great run while they had it. But if you're not committed to this, if you're not committed to hospitality, if you're not committed to the property management, it's not the right place to be.
Yeah. And I think that the people who want to be in it, that are going to be a professional in this space, are going to really benefit from it. I mean, we're going to benefit from one another. I think that all of a sudden you're going to see a liquidation of properties that maybe somebody says, you know what, I shouldn't have been in the space to start with. And that's fine. That's fine. And that's every single industry. It's just like the accountants or real estate appraisers or whatever it might be. The people who are the less professional or who are the least qualified to be doing the work are going to eventually just kind of go away.
Right. The ones who are the most passionate, the ones who are the most professional, those are the ones who should perform the best. And I think we're seeing that, to your point about the top performing properties continuing to outpace all the rest of them. I think we're seeing that. The people who take this seriously are the ones who are performing the best. And I think everyone else who stays in are going to see that, and they're going to follow suit. They're going to figure out what they're doing right, and the whole game will just continue to level up.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about, things that maybe the biggest mistakes that people are making, which is always important. But let's look at the flip side of that. So talking about the people who are going to be the best at it, who are going to be professionals in it, who are going to be lifting up the entire industry, what are they doing? What makes them a top performer in the short-term vacation rental industry?
Well, I think that the last, let's say 20 years has really been about basics. I think it's been about standards. I think it's been about, how do we do this right? How do we run a company? How do we have operations in place and processes and some of the right tools? I think that's what it's been about. I think that the next evolution in this industry is really around hospitality. It's how do we make the guests feel special? How do we pay attention to them? And we started this by talking about communication. I think that's really one of the strongest places. If we're quick with communication, then the guest feels like they're heard. But that's only a small component of it. I think that there's a lot of other things that the industry is starting to do. I think that we start to expand to experiences and add-on services. And I think the guests start to have that experience. They go on vacation, and it's really easy for them to, add a chef or add a massage or add a late checkout. Right now, that's very cumbersome. That's very difficult to do. But as we evolve, we start to think about what those guest needs are, and our hospitality then expands to our offerings, and we start to give the guests what they're looking for when they're looking for it. That's I think, the game that we're in. We're so unique in the way that we have unique properties, and we have unique guests, and we have unique managers. We don't want to lose that component, but we need to bring in this level of hospitality that hotels are able to offer, because A, they're more experienced and been doing it for longer, but B, they're all within one roof. We need to be able to offer that same level of hospitality on the short-term rental, vacation rental side of things. We're not quite there, but I can see signs of that coming. And that's what excites me the most. I think that we become a really, really strong hospitality vertical, potentially even the top performing hospitality vertical, which is amazing to think. 2008, there was, less than 8% of people who are aware of us. Here we are in 2024 talking about how we could surpass hotels and what they're doing if we do things right. But I truly believe that. I think that's the next evolution. Focus on hospitality and get that really right. Everything else will fall into place.
Yeah. What about, I'm curious, I know that hotels are always required to meet ADA type requirements, but we're not. And I'm curious, are we missing out on a big market there because maybe we are not accommodating people with disabilities?
Well, that's an interesting one, and you're speaking my love language there. So, my role today in the industry is really as a consultant. I've filled a lot of different roles, and today what I'm doing is helping a number of different vendors that I believe in with growth. So, sort of that intersection of sales and marketing. And one of the vendors that I've been helping over the last few months is called Becoming Rentable, and it's a company that is trying to certify vacation rental, short-term rental homes as disability friendly. So it's interesting, and I'm glad you pointed out that the vacation rental space is not reliant on the ADA. We are not required to follow those ADA guidelines. And it's because we're so unique. You can't create a standard that's going to go across the entire industry and retrofit that standard on an existing inventory of homes that is, million deep across the entire country. It's just not realistic. But what the other side of that is, the uniqueness really aligns exceptionally well with the uniqueness of disabilities. There's no disability that is the same. And I'll say this from my time working with Becoming Rentable. They've opened my eyes to that tremendously. But I also have a special needs son who's 11, nonverbal, rare genetic condition, but really sort of presents itself as severe autism. And I can say this with very strong confidence that there are uniqueness about the disabilities that matches exceptionally well with the uniqueness of the vacation rental industry and the properties in this industry. So to answer your question specifically, are we missing a huge opportunity? We are missing one of the biggest opportunities in all of hospitality right now. There is welcome someone with disabilities. What you need is a really good understanding of what you have at your properties to match what they might need on their travels. So really what this is more of an exercise of matchmaking than it is about standards. So I'll give you a couple examples. So for my life with my nonverbal son, I need to have a lock on the door so I know that he's not going to leave on his own. That's a $5 purchase of a chain lock at a local hardware store that you put on a door. Well, now if you can add that into your pictures and your property descriptions, now all of a sudden you match. So the third party becoming rentable is a really important step, because now we're not reliant on the property managers or the OTA host who don't fully understand what they're doing. We're going to set up, Becoming Rentable sets up this criteria. We'll go out and certify that you have these pieces. And that way we'll have a really deep filtering within the website. So when someone with a disability wants to search, they search all of their criteria, and only the ones that come back are the ones that match their specific criteria that have been certified. Now, scratching the surface. And I'm passionate about this because I think that this is one of those opportunities that you could miss. The window is not going to be open forever because the industry has ignored this for a very long time, because they sort of thought that ADA was applicable. And as a result, they were afraid of lawsuits. But you've got really only one company that's pushing this, and it's an older woman who has muscular dystrophy. Lorraine is amazing. But the idea that, she'll be able to push this for the next 20 years while the industry wakes up and understands this is probably not the reality. So we've got a really small window of someone who's passionate and understands it that can push this. But if the industry misses this opportunity, then I think it could be gone. And it would be a shame if we don't get a chance to capitalize.
Yeah. One of my best friend is a disabled comedian named Josh Blue. He's got palsy and really an incredible guy. But a lot of his jokes that he makes, he talks a lot about the disabled community and talks about how big it is. It's one of the, and I don't know if it's true. Half the stuff that he jokes about, I'm always like going, I don't know. Are you joking or are you telling me the truth on this one? But it's a huge segment of the population, the disabled community. And
let me give you some
we're
stats,
not accommodating them.
This will put it into perspective. So 9 out of 10 people, let's talk about disability as sort of a long-term disability versus a short-term disability. 9 out of 10 people will have some sort of short-term disability, right? You break your leg and now you're on crutches or in a boot or you need a wheelchair or whatever it is. There's a large number of those people. So I would argue that of the groups that are coming through our industry right now, huge percentage of those groups have disabilities within their group. We're just not speaking to them or giving them the hospitality or giving them the guest experience that they need because we're not paying attention to it. Now take the short-term disability out of it, and then you could get into just the millions of people that have different types of disabilities. But let's add the one that everyone knows about, which is baby boomers and aging. If you just think about the aging community within the baby boomers, there's millions upon millions of boomers that are going through this aging process that are going to have dementia, that are going to have not a lack of ability to walk up and down stairs. We're not, as an industry, we're not paying attention to any of that. And the reality is that even the homeowners, if you think about these management companies, we talked about, the second homeowners that bought this 30 years ago because they were intending to come down and visit. Well, those people are now in that category where they might not be able to get up and down the stairs at their own property that they bought. So we've really got to, if you take this back and you think about us as a population as a whole, it's not just this, whatever the label is that we want to quantify as disability. It's really a much wider gap than we want to think about. And all we need to do is express what we've already got at the properties. It doesn't even need to be something like you've got to go in and put a new bathroom in. You just need to understand what the needs of the traveling community are, and then match those needs to the things that you might already have at the property, or make some small, low-cost improvements, and we'll start to match this up. But like I said, I think the window of opportunity closes relatively quick.
Yeah. Adam, this has been so good today. This has just been a wealth of knowledge. I mean, you've given so much, and I feel like you and I could probably do this for hours. I mean, we've got so much that we could be talking about, but I do want people to be able to find you, to be able to go out to get more information from you, because I feel like you're a wealth of really good knowledge. Where do people need to go to find you?
Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you asking me to come on, Rodman. And, I've always said about sales that if you believe in something, if you're passionate about it, then you can sell it. And that's the way I feel about this industry. I live it day to day. I use it on a regular basis. It's my livelihood, but it's much deeper than that. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to do good in the world through vacation rental. So I'm really passionate about doing it. I'm more than happy to have conversations with anyone who's interested in having those conversations. I think that LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. If you do a quick search for Adam Norko on LinkedIn, I'll pop up. It's LinkedIn/Adam Norko, Norko. But please reach out to me there, and I'm happy to engage and have discussions with anyone that might have some questions.
I love that. I'm going to connect with you right after we get off this call. So I would encourage other people to do the same. Last question. There's so many new people coming into the industry, and there's so many things they don't know. Like, this wealth of knowledge that we talk about is so important. And some people think, well, I'll figure it out as I go along. But at the same time, it's really important to have as much data going into it as you could. But if you could go back and, think about your best piece of advice to give that person coming into the industry, what would your top piece of advice be for them?
Well, I think we covered the best one is to buy right. I think, doing all that research and figuring out what to buy. But regardless of that, let's put that to the side. That could go for any sort of investment. I think the other thing I would look for are people that you can align with and learn from. I think the faster you get to the right people who understand things, and I think this is in life in general, I think we spend a lot of time looking for the right pieces of information or the right sources of information. And I think the faster you can get to the right source of information that aligns with what your goals are, with what your beliefs are, I think that moves things a lot faster than, to your point, trying to figure it out as you go. And I'm the type of person that loves to figure it out as you go. I never open the directions when I'm putting something together. But at the same time, I think that if you're getting into something that is so new to you and offers so many pitfalls, because if you don't do this right, you could lose your money very quickly. I think you want to get into the right mastermind group or connect with the right people online. And I don't just say this next comment because it's what I do, but I think consultants offer a lot of opportunity. You got to find the right ones that make sense and align with what you believe in. But if you find the right sources of information, that's a life hack in itself. I mean, you can move so much faster if you just get the right person or the right people pointing you in the right direction.
Yeah. Shaving 5 years off your learning curve, shaving so much time off your learning curve. And this is a big investment. This is not a small investment. I mean, you're buying very expensive property. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can really lose. But if you really know what you're doing, you'll have so much to gain. So it's a small price to pay in the beginning to make sure that you're getting the right and good advice.
Totally agree.
So, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show today, man. This has been great. I appreciate you. And I'll see you on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Vacation Property Secrets podcast. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. By leaving a review, you not only support the show, but you also help others find and enjoy it just like you did. Also, please share this episode with somebody who could benefit from it. And if you're aiming to build a short-term vacation rental investment business that's based on strong investment fundamentals and not just emotion, I'd love to invite you to a free training that I'm hosting. It's my financial forecasting for maximum vacation home profitability training, an on-demand video course that's completely free. It walks you through the investment fundamentals to build and scale your short-term vacation rental business. You'll also learn how to estimate investment income and your operating expenses to build a projected pro forma operating statement and the potential NOI and return on investment for your property. Just go to vacationpropertysecrets.com to get access to your free training. We'll see you next week for another episode of the Vacation Property Secrets podcast.